Welcome everybody to a special Rideshare Rodeo daytime edition. I've been looking forward to this. I'm excited to have Kim Kavin with me and Karen Anderson with me. You guys, if you're not familiar with them, you will get to know them over the next hour. They both come together and represent the same thing when it all comes down to it, but they're on different sides of the coast. And about a year plus ago, I was lucky enough to be included into their wolf pack. And so they're kind of, you can't have two alphas, but I think of them as the East and West Coast alphas. So we got Kim on the East Coast as the alpha in New Jersey, and
Hey,
Karen.
Steve, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. And we got Karen in California. So we got the coast represented. So
California represent right here.
So yeah, so I mean, I'm hoping we get through a lot of this. You guys, we are on a time schedule today, but we will do the best we can to cover as much as we can. So right before we came on, I was asking if we should start off with a little AB5, which led to Prop 22. And we'll keep this pretty brief because we have a lot to cover. But I think it's important for you guys to know what the damage outside of the app-based gig economy platforms was to people who have been in business for 30, 40 years in California. And I'll be posting some links as well into the live chat as we go. Some are from Karen and some will be from Kim that are either stories they've done or things associated with what we're talking about. And starting with, I'm going to put some blog rolls here of the stories that people have told about what AB5 did. But if Karen could just give us a little wrap up of AB5.
Well, there's a lot of misinformation and confusion about it. It's just so convoluted, and a lot of people think that AB5 doesn't apply to them, or that it's been repealed in its entirety, or that it only applies to rideshare, or that Prop 22 eliminated it, or whatever. But AB5 was passed in 2019 and went into effect in 2020, and it applies the onerous ABC test to every single profession in California, unless that profession has an exemption. So it affects adversely everybody from nurse anesthetists to speech pathologists to community theater and court reporters and transcribers and transcriptionists and professional Santas and licensed professionals and six-figure earners and everybody under the sun. Mm-hmm. So there's just it's alive and well, and it's still wreaking havoc across the vast swath of professions. In my group, we've identified more than 600 categories of professions and occupations and sectors that have been negatively impacted by AB5. And you asked about Prop 22. That was a ballot initiative in late 2020 during the election that allowed a carve-out, sort of a hybrid carve-out that came with some perks in it, purported perks. And the voters of California voted overwhelmingly to allow app-based rideshare and delivery drivers to continue to remain independent contractors. Right. And the one of the misconceptions is that Prop 22 exempted the entire gig economy. It only applies to app-based rideshare and delivery.
Yeah, and I'll say this, that the Prop 22, I've had a lot of people, so I have a mixed of a crowd here. It was supposed to help the rideshare drivers. I don't know any rideshare drivers that get any Prop 22 money. No, because it has to be active time that you're spending working that hour. So if you work 2 hours, but you only are active 1 hour, that's going to be what it's based on. There's no rideshare driver that has an active hour where he doesn't make minimum wage and 20% in California.
Well, we have rideshare drivers in our group that were very happy with Prop 22 and are making averaging $25 to $30 an hour as Lyft drivers or whatever. But that's the case with every exemption. There's no sector that got an exemption they are entirely happy with the exemption, because there's always something. And you can blame AB5 more than anything else, because they couldn't get a complete and total blanket, very few professions got blanket exemptions. And even if you did get a blanket exemption, you still have to default to another worker classification test called Borello. So you can bypass the ABC test if you got an exemption, but then you're held to the Borello standard, and the EDD can come in and audit you under that standard. So there's a lot of pitfalls and minefields with AB5, and a lot of unhappy people. You look at musicians, for example, their exemption only exempts the segment of musicians. That exemption process pitted musicians against musicians because some people got an exemption and some people didn't. The same is true with journalists. They're not happy with their exemption because it still continues to ban video journalism and journalism for TV and broadcast and movies. So there's always something with the exemptions that aren't what they appear.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I wanted to point that out because careers have been destroyed in California. I mean, the stat I saw was under 10% of the affected people by AB5. I think it was like 6.8 were gig platform workers. So you guys need to realize this AB5 that caused Prop 22 was such a disaster. And this is one state. It is a big state. It is a big state for freelancers and all of these jobs, but it destroyed livelihoods. I mean, we're talking about on the gig platforms, we don't like this, that, the other. This destroyed livelihoods. And this is, I think, a good time to move it into a little bit of what's going on nationwide, which is where Kim...
Can I just say one thing? If Prop 22 had not passed, then you would see just the fact that it did pass. I mean, what would be the alternative? If it didn't pass, then these these companies would be forced to make everybody employees. And then you talk about people being unhappy, right? Uber and Lyft were threatening to leave the state right up to the very 11th hour until the court imposed issued a stay so that the voters could make the decision. And now, they're still in litigation. I mean, there are two cases that we're following very closely, and we're waiting for the rulings, one from the Ninth Circuit and one from the Court of Appeals.
Judge Raish, and this is the constitutional challenge, right?
No, the constitutional challenge. Oh, you mean for Prop 22 itself? Yes. The state of California is advocating on behalf of Prop 22. The state of California, the Attorney General wants Prop 22 to remain in place because it's a very high bar to overturn the will of the voters. So in a crazy twist, you had Rob Bonta, who's the Attorney General, actually in support of Prop 22 in the courts, but opposed to it and having voted for AB5 when he was an assembly person. And the other one is it's kind of a sleeper lawsuit, but it was brought by Uber and Postmates, and it got dismissed by an activist judge before it even got off the ground. And that one is about that one challenges the 14th Amendment about the exemptions and how arbitrary and how it's in violation of the 14th Amendment's equal protection clause. And those of us who are nerds, and I think Kim watched it too, watched the Ninth Circuit hearing last year and watched those judges grill the state of California about why AB5 is such a mess and that the exemptions, there's no rhyme or reason for any of these exemptions. One of the judges was quoted. And another judge said, "You mean to tell me that Uber for dogs has an exemption, but Uber for humans does not?" So we're waiting to hear from the ruling from the Ninth Circuit on that case. And that case could be very valuable for the ultimate fight against AB5 because it's talking about AB5 as a whole.
Okay. So the repeal AB5 fight is still stalled out. It's very
stalled out because unfortunately, most people think that AB5 doesn't apply to them, that most professions are exempt, and it's really not a problem anymore because of all these supposed exemptions, which really are smoke and mirrors. And the media itself, even Wall Street Journal and Forbes and Reuters and all the rest, they just regurgitate these erroneous facts, not facts, untruths, about AB5 and where it's at. So it's very hard to combat that and get people to take it seriously. But the people who are affected by it directly and the businesses that are getting audited, that's where the rude awakening is about AB5. These small businesses are being put out of business, and that'll bring just for contracting with an independent contractor, and that will bring us to Julie Sue when that topic comes up about the opening at the DOL, and Kim can talk about that.
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad Kim is going to talk about that, because I'm a little concerned about Julie Sue, even as an interim or whatever, with Marty leaving, because didn't she cost somewhere between 20 and 32 billion dollars to the state of California?
The latest is $40 billion were paid out. Billion. 40 billion is the newest figure that were paid out in fraudulent unemployment insurance claims during the pandemic to crooks, criminals, and cartels. And it all could have been prevented because the state auditor issued a very scathing report in 2019 telling her to clean up her act at the EDD and update. They had $30 million to update their equipment. There was a lot of problems with security of and identity theft because they were exposing everybody's social security numbers, and she did nothing. So a lot of that was completely preventable. There's a whole series of debacles under her leadership. And even Democrats were just like scathing in their reaction to what happened via the EDD and their unemployment insurance, handling of unemployment insurance benefits during the pandemic and pandemic unemployment assistance as well.
So Kim, let's hand you the ball, because maybe this is the perfect time.
So yeah, let's help people understand who Julie Sue is and why we care about her. Mm-hmm. What happened after AB5 was put into place in California? It didn't go into effect until January of 2020, but it was voted on in September of 2019. That's when they passed it, and Newsom signed it into law. Immediately, the people pushing this anti-independent contractor policy introduced copycat bills. One popped up in New Jersey and one popped up in New York. There was talk of another one popping up in Illinois. The plan was that California was going to be the start of a domino series of these bills, and they were going to start in the states that had what's known as trifecta Democrat control, which means that the one party rule controls the assembly, the Senate at the state level, and the governor's mansion. So you can get these kinds of partisan bills through. The chaos that Karen just described from AB5 in California, it happened very quickly for a lot of people, including freelance writers, which is what I am. And some of the folks that those of us in New Jersey know out in California started screaming, saying, hey, wait a minute, what's going on? My clients are dropping me and I'm losing all this money. So we got very vocal in New Jersey and stopped the copycat bill here. We used the media a lot. We wrote a lot of op-eds and things and just made a lot of noise, showed up at hearings and made a lot of noise. That scared New York. They didn't end up introducing a bill, or they did introduce the bill. They ended up not moving it forward. It also scared Illinois so much that they didn't move a bill forward at all. After that brings us to early 2020, when AB5 went into effect and the problems continued, as Karen just described. That's around the time when Prop 22 started being talked about. And at that time, we also saw a federal version of this come out called the PRO Act. That was in the United States Congress. And we all got together and worked on fighting that, as did a lot of other people. You can imagine Uber and Lyft were in there, truckers were in there, realtors were in there, all kinds of people were fighting this PRO Act. That finally died because 3 Democrats stood up and said, hang on a minute, what's going on in California is really bad for a lot of people. We don't want to do this nationwide. So it was 3 Democrats. It was Mark Warner of Virginia, Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, and Mark Kelly of Arizona. They're all United States senators. They stopped that PRO Act from going through, at which point we had the election. And as I'm sure all your listeners now know, we have a divided Congress where you have the Democrats in control of the Senate and the Republicans in control of the House. So with that situation, We know the PRO Act is dead on arrival in the House. It will never, ever get through. And because of that block at the federal level, what we're seeing now is the people pushing this garbage going back to different paths. One path is they're trying to go back to some of the states where the Democrats have trifecta control. Another path is they're trying to do regulatory workarounds, which means the White House and the agencies it controls, such as the Department of Labor, are trying to just impose rules that get as close to AB5 as they can get in a way that they think will survive if they get challenged up to the Supreme Court. The United States Labor Department currently has a proposed rule out there. Says what I just said. It's wish we could do it nationwide, but we're not sure it can survive a court challenge. So we're going to get as close as we can with this new proposal. The person in charge of that agency has just announced that he's leaving to take a new job. Julie Su, who you were just talking about from California, is the current number 2 in the United States Department of Labor. So we're now in a position where we have a regulatory agency trying to get as close as it can get to AB5 without an act of Congress or without getting stopped by the Supreme Court. And the person who's next in line to be the figurehead of that effort is Julie Su from California, who was such a disaster and lost billions of dollars and pushed AB5 and was tweeting at rideshare drivers to apply for unemployment insurance they didn't even qualify for, so she could use them as political pawns in this whole game. So what we have is people in positions of power still trying to push this freelance busting policy by any means necessary. And that's where Julie Su and the Department of Labor fit into that bigger picture war.
Yeah. And again, everybody, it's not 40 million, it's 40 billion that Julie Su lost on her watch in California.
Well, and she's not the only candidate for the job to be the head of the Labor Department.
No, but isn't she the deputy secretary? Is that correct?
She's number 2.
So
there's a war,
Marty
there's a
leaves,
fight going on where you have some people in the Biden administration who put her forward for her current job. They're wanting to move her up, but you have Bernie Sanders, who's currently the head of the Senate Labor Committee. He's pushing a woman named Sarah Nelson, who's a more activist, actual union leader from even farther over on the left. And he's making noise in the press about how she could get the job. There's been other people who've put forward other names. I
thought I saw a guy.
There's several. You have a guy who Nancy Pelosi likes, and she wants to have put in that job. There's all these factions developing about who's going to get this job. I mean, no matter what, we're talking about a White House that literally just this week has been tweeting again, we have to pass the PRO Act. We have to pass the PRO Act. They're going to put somebody in the job who stands against independent contractors on this issue. It's the policy of the administration. That's who they are. They've been clear about who they are and what they want to do. So none of these outcomes is good for us, but it is a bit hard to understand why they even confirmed Julie Su the first time around, given all the chaos in California. It's hard to wrap your brain around.
So here's a number that I pulled up, and I just want to know where this, what I understand. Biden is a lifer at unions. That's been his fight his whole life. Now it seems to be way far over the top. Everybody has to be part of this. Everybody has to do as we say. Nobody should be able to have a business. But so I pulled up some stats. In 1983 was when the Labor and Statistics Bureau started doing comparisons of W-2 employees to unions. And at that time, it was 20 point something % of all W-2 employees in this country were in a union. Now it's 10.1. So it's half. This much later, we have more employees in the workforce. But also, since the pandemic, we have more businesses being opened by people left and right. I mean, the numbers are skyrocketing the other way. So I know it's what they are trying to push, but why? Why? And again, I might have to pull in a little California into this for you guys, because when AB5 passed, part of that was supposed to be that it was going to bring jobs. I've joked with both of these ladies before about what jobs did it create? But it's really no joke. I don't know still that it has. Maybe some government stuff, but even that's probably been closed since it happened. Are there any jobs from AB5? Because that was supposed to happen.
Well, Universal Logistics converted 60 of their independent contractor drivers to employee drivers, but they're such a huge company that they could absorb that. And I think they were used by the Teamsters as an example of, oh, here's some jobs created by AB5, you know. But for the most part, it's just a smattering of, you know, sometimes people will, like, for example, a Pilates studio, a yoga studio, you can't have independent contractor teachers there anymore. So if you want to run a yoga studio, you have to put them on payroll, and that's going to cost you your staff, and it's going to, and a lot of them don't want to be employees either. And as far as truckers go, there's 70,000 independent owner operator truckers in California that they don't want to be employee drivers. Most of them want to remain independent. So the reason that they're going after the reason is unionizing. They see these groups like Rideshare and trucking as low-hanging fruit, where they can corral as many workers as possible for the purposes of unionizing them. And everybody else is also in that web. You know, AB5, it's not in unintended consequences that all these other professions are ruled by AB5 in California. They want to control the entire independent workforce.
Yeah, what listeners have to understand is it's illegal to unionize an independent contractor. That's the problem that unions have. Unions have historically low membership numbers. They're trying to figure out how to get themselves out of the ditch. And what they see is this huge growing pool, by some estimates now a third of the US workforce, earning at least some or all of our income as independent contractors. And they see a honeypot. They can't get their fingers into that honeypot unless the rules are changed so that they can unionize independent contractors. And what they're trying to do with these types of laws is just misclassify everybody as an employee, because then it would be legal to try to unionize them. That's why this is happening.
Correct. Julie Sue, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Julie Sue was also the labor commissioner in California from 2011 till 2018 under Jerry Brown. So she was the top cop enforcer of classification violations in California. So the reasons that she's dangerous to independent contracting is that her focus and her background is all about enforcement and sending the hounds out on businesses, large and small. And she wouldn't even suspend these worker classification audits. Actually, they're called payroll tax audits on small businesses during the pandemic, even though a lot of these businesses were already shut down or put out of business for the pandemic. During the pandemic, she wouldn't even suspend these onerous, aggressive, ruthless audits on single person businesses and moms and pops and everybody else. It's not just the big Uber and Lyft that they go after. They go after single person entrepreneurs. If you make a mistake with a single independent contractor, you can get audited and it can put you out of business because the fines and penalties are massive.
I mean, I remember I always discuss Gail, so I have to give her a quick shout out. Love Gail. But, I mean, Gail got slapped with one, and she's a nonprofit. She's a true nonprofit certified with the state of California for 20 years.
I watched the EDD, the Employment Development Department in California, puts on these webinars. And I watched one yesterday, and it made your head spin, the amount of labor codes that they were spewing out. And that person that was giving the webinar from the EDD even said that if you're a homeowner and you hire a tree trimmer who's not licensed or who's not a certified arborist, and somebody from that tree trimming company ends up injuring themselves or killing you on your property, and the insurance company starts to investigate it and your homeowner's insurance doesn't cover it, the EDD will go after you because you should have been an employer and put them on payroll. They actually used that as an example yesterday.
So, Kim, I need to ask you, I'm getting a lot of people who are thinking, okay, well, the new year's started. I think we're out of the woods on this. I mean, literally like, hey, nothing happened. The sky didn't fall. And I was always, and I reply with, I never said the sky was falling. I said, pay attention.
So there's a number of reasons why they might feel that way. Number one is if they're in California, Prop 22 passed and a bunch of exemptions were put into the bill through an emergency measure called Assembly Bill 2257, less than a year after AB5 went through. So in California, the reason you didn't see more widespread damage is because the lawmakers panicked. They realized they had made a mistake and they had to go back and make some fixes. When that happened, that's when you saw at the federal level a couple of the Democratic senators step up and say, hang on, before we move forward with this at the federal level, let's push pause because what's going on in California is pretty bad. Then we had the election. And so now there's no way anything can get through Congress, but that doesn't mean nothing can happen. Like I said earlier, what we're seeing now is the people pushing this stuff are now starting to try to go back to states where they think they can get a copy of AB5 through, and they're trying to use regulatory agencies to do the dirty work that they couldn't do through Congress. So we've heard, most recently, the big chatter we've heard is in New York State, Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. Some of our members actually had a meeting just a couple of days ago with the office of the sponsor of the AB5 copycat bill in New York, and they were told, our people were told point blank that we are acceptable collateral damage. They see a different vision for the world. That's the way it's going to be. They've learned nothing. They're going to keep coming at us with this. If you don't believe it, call your own lawmakers in those states, ask them for yourself. You're going to have the same kind of meetings we have where you walk away scratching your head thinking these people are from planet Mars. They're just zealots who want what they want and are going to get what they get. We are also going to have the U.S. Labor Department rule be finalized. That's expected to happen this spring. There is no indication whatsoever that they're going to listen to any of the tens of thousands of written public comments that they received. There was an overwhelming number of people in public hearings, comments that were filed in writing saying, stop what you're doing. This is nuts. Leave us alone. They're not going to listen. Their goal is to turn us into unionizable employees. So that rule is going to drop. Then what's going to happen? The sky is not going to fall immediately. There's going to be lawsuits. Anybody who was in those public hearings, as I was, because, you know, what else do I have better do with my day than listen to these people, idiots, all day long? But it was very clear in the public hearings, and it's very clear if you read the public comments, there's going to be multiple lawsuits filed against the United States Department of Labor. One very prominent attorney in this space said this has the Supreme Court written all over it. There's a number of different attack angles that these lawyers are talking about coming at this with. So probably for at least a year or so, the U.S. Labor Department rule will get tied up in the courts. That's going to bring us pretty close to the next presidential election, at which point we are once again going to see how things shake out, who's in charge of what. You know, depending on how it swings, could the sky fall? Yeah. Could protections be put in place? Yeah. And I don't mean to sound like I support one party versus another. Fight for Freelancers is not a partisan organization. We just know where this particular issue is coming from, and it's coming from one side of the aisle. So we either have to get these folks to understand that what they're doing is wrong, or we have to vote to save our careers. That's kind of where I come down on the issue.
Yeah. And the common denominator is the ABC test. Yes. That we see in the FLSA rulemaking that Kim was just talking about, they actually admit in their 200-page document with the rules that they're wanting to adopt or impose, that they can't outright come out by statute and implement or deploy the ABC test outright in the Fair Labor Standards Act. But their language comes this close to mimicking everything in the ABC test from California anyways. And so the ABC test is also seen in the provision of the PRO Act as well, what Kim was talking about.
I mean, isn't it more prongs? I have Kim's prongs from her Fight for Freelancers USA.com, which I just put in the show notes, everybody. But I have like here, here's the would you fail the A prong? Would you fail the B prong? We can go through them. I think it's the B that's the big one, right?
The B is the problem in the A. They're all
here's
problematic.
the B for those that don't know.
The key is a pretty big problem too.
There's problems with all of them, but the B prong language, I think this is instrumental in terms of what Karen and I have been saying about the U.S. Labor Department trying to drop a rule that's really similar. So if you look at the B prong of the ABC test, that's what's in California's AB5, what they're trying to pass in the PRO Act, what they tried to do in copycat bills in the states. What you see in that B prong of the ABC test says you cannot be in the same or usual course of business as the person who's paying you. So for people like me, if you're a writer, you can't be working for a publisher, which makes absolutely no sense at all. But this goes on for everybody, realtors, truckers.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just anybody in the chat or anybody watching this on replay, test it for yourself.
But the language is you can't be in the usual course of business or the same line of business. If you look at what the United States Labor Department is now trying to impose, it says you can't be doing something that is integral to the business of the company that's paying you. Now, you tell me, Steve, when the people pushing this are intent on turning us into employees, how much different do you really think that language is?
Yeah, it's a chilling effect.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm not really sold why all the money's like, let's get the unions back up. The unions are a failure. I'm starting to wonder, some people have said is the gig economy where I'm starting to wonder, hey, how protected are you at a W-2? I mean, it's not 50 years ago where people would start and end their employment at GM Motors.
Well, why does there have to be a binary decision between independent contractor and employee to begin with, 1099 and W-2? Why can't it be hybrid? I mean, we're in a new age. So why can't we talk about hybrid solutions for classification status?
Right. And I've seen a lot of stuff like, by the way, for those of you that don't know, a lot of the conversation I have with these people, it happens on Twitter. And there's a lot of conversation that goes haywire on Twitter. But I saw a good post on one of mine that was, look, since 1938, you've had the NLRB has said you have the right to participate in a union or not to. It's your right. And you're also allowed, for those people who say, no, you're not, you're also allowed to go and protest those.
That's where the PRO Act provision addresses the National Labor Relations Act with the ABC test. ABC test from California is in the PRO Act. And they say for purposes of organizing to determine who, if you're an independent contractor or not. But to me, it's like a doctor finding a melanoma spot and just saying, oh, it's okay. It's not going to spread. You just leave it there. And the minute this ABC test gets a foothold in federal law, then it's really hard. It's going to be really hard to keep it from spreading because it's going to set precedents for courts and legislatures to make, rulings and law and everything else around this test. So once it gets makes an appearance in federal law, just because they claim it's innocuous, it's like claiming that a spot of melanoma on your skin is innocuous and it's not going to spread.
And that's not just hyperbole. President Biden, if you go to his website, joebiden.com, he campaigned on a promise to make the California ABC test the basis for all labor, employment, and tax law. The PRO Act is labor. What's happening at USDOL is employment. This is not a joke. The intent is to take this nationwide for everybody. And there are experts, including a former chairman of the National Labor Relations Board, who say the minute this thing goes through, that's it. Doesn't matter which area of law it gets into first. It's going to be California nightmare all over again for everybody in the country with no exemptions, zero exemptions.
And speaking of the czar of the exemption process in California and the author of the putrid AB5 law, Lorena Gonzalez, the former assembly person who's now the head of the California Labor Federation, which represents 2,100 unions in California, was invited to the State of the Union speech 2 weeks ago as a guest of Representative Katie Porter. And she's jumping up, down about the possibility of Julie Su becoming the next labor secretary. And you know damn well that Julie Su was behind the crafting of AB5 because she was a labor commissioner when the ABC test was first adopted in 2018 by the California Supreme Court in the Dynamics decision.
Right. So this is Chris, and I think this is fitting for right now. I've been earmarking a couple questions, hoping we have time to get back to them. And everybody should be putting your questions in the comments. I will try my best to get to them. But why does it seem like they are trying to force you into unions besides trying to employ everyone who doesn't really want it?
Well, people simply being employees doesn't benefit unions at all. And it's this legislation, this policymaking, this is being written by the unions. We have confirmation of that from meetings with lawmakers all across the country. This is who's writing it, that it doesn't matter. Their ultimate goal is to get as many new union members as they can. That's their intent. So the ultimate goal is not just to make everyone an employee, it's to make them an employee so they can be unionized.
The states also want to capture all that payroll tax revenue as well. And what else? There's a bevy of different reasons why they want to control the independent workforce, but they see the trajectory of the independent workforce. They want to squelch it. They don't, and the fact of the matter is that a lot of the freelance activity that goes on in the United States, I think 60 million is what they're talking about. They're side hustles. They're a lot of people that do a side hustle, whether you're working for a wedding planner or doing something, just writing an article here or there for somebody and getting 1099 for it. It's just to supplement your income already. It maybe supplement your Social Security if you're older, supplement you already have coverage, through your spouse for health insurance or whatever. So, there's this mythology about everybody needs to be in a full-time job and we shouldn't be cobbling together these jobs,
There's also the issue of political contributions. We got to talk about political contributions too.
That's right.
In terms of why would lawmakers support this? If you look at the political contributions that unions make,
yes,
the vast majority, over 90% of that money, and we're talking big amounts of money, goes to Democrats who are running. So the more union members you have, the bigger pool of cash you have, the more political contributions can be made. And that also, not just hyperbole. I mean, you can look up the stats, but there's a resolution in the House right now, in the United States House of Representatives. It's called House Resolution 72. It was introduced by Representative Darrell Issa out in California. And it's called Recognizing the Contributions of Independent Workers and Contractors to the American Economy. It's like a 2-page thing. All it does is say independent workers, app-based earners, freelancers, and other independent contractors are important. We matter to the economy. That's all it says. So far, there's not a single Democrat who has signed on to co-sponsor this thing. It's all Republicans and only Republicans. And there's no question that this is ultimately about what the issue we've been talking about, because at the very bottom of the 2 pages, it talks about how, despite all the evidence that shows the vast majority of independent contractors are happier, making as much or more cash as they would in a full-time job, doing better mentally, physically, all the good things that people say about being an independent contractor, this resolution says, and despite all this, we have some elected officials trying to take away this choice of independent work. So we want to just resolve that independent workers are important and independent work itself provides benefits to people who choose it. Not a single Democrat has signed on to co-sponsor this yet. So if you can't see the dividing line, I don't know how much clearer it's flashing bright red in our faces. You just have to look.
Yeah, and in California, AB5 disproportionately affects women, seniors, stay-at-home moms, people who with chronic disabilities, and people who are chronically ill, and people who are forced to stay home and take care of a loved one, still have the opportunity to earn a living from home remotely. I mean, and of course we've participated in, last year we participated in all of these sessions with the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights California Advisory Board, and I brought in a lot of different people from my group, including strippers who have really been put out to pasture in California, and the most marginalized of the stripper groups, the people who do that for a living, are having to turn to survival sex work on the streets because of AB5. You know, I mean, it affects just a whole gamut of people who have fallen through the cracks, and especially seniors. Seniors are really hard hit. And then you have people like, when AB5 first went into effect, we had a lot of healthcare professionals, independent healthcare professionals, saying, I can't go to the home of the elderly person who just had a stroke. I've been teaching him how to learn to swallow again after the stroke, and he had to abandon his patients. And there's horror story after horror story about that, you know. So, and the exemptions are arbitrary. They pick winners and losers. And so there is no rhyme or reason to the exemptions, but in the PRO Act, there's no exemptions at all. So what's going to happen? You know, are they going to have this scorched earth kind of chaos that happened in California? Why would they want to replicate that with such a destructive, you know, bill or policy?
Well, if you read the work of the scholars that they're always quoting from, they tell you exactly why they want to do it. They think all the exemptions in California were a mistake. Yep. They think, they say it outright in the literature, the quote unquote reports that they've written in the wake of AB5. They come right out and say, it would have been so much better if we didn't have all these exemptions. We could have actually. So it's, again, this isn't an accident. What's happening is not an accident. This is intent. This is intent to inflict harm for people to try to get their way.
So, Kim, I need to ask you this though: is it that it's the Biden administration that no Democrats signed on to that bill? Is that part of? I mean, because some Democrats have to. I'm again. There's good and bad on both sides of this, but some of these people, I feel like, know this is a horrible thing. I feel like their constituents, maybe not in every one of them, but know that it's not good.
I encourage everybody listening to us today, call your United States House of Representatives person, ask them to co-sponsor House Resolution 72. It's not even a bill. It's a resolution. It's not even a thing that will become a law. It's like a resolution saying mothers are good people and we like them in America. This says independent contractors contribute to the economy. That's what this says. If you can find some Democrats to sign on to this, I really look forward to cheering them. I sincerely do, because we need some common sense in this world. And this is a common sense resolution that's showing just how extreme these policies are.
So before we even move forward, I need to say this, that oddly, I had posted a bunch of videos on YouTube, not a bunch, but I was getting going. But my first live was with Karen. The first live I ever did on this channel. The second was with Kim. Kim was in the chat on the first live, and here's a comment she made that I think strikes to what's going on right now. Is this kind of what you're talking about? Why to get Democrats to sign on?
It's absolutely true. You have certain lawmakers who know exactly what they're doing, and they're very pro-union, and this is what they want to do. But we have sat down with Democrats, Republicans, state and federal level, where they're asking us questions about what's in the bill that they co-sponsored because somebody told them to. And they at first don't even understand why they're there. They think it's only about Uber. So again, everybody listening needs to call their representatives and say, this is wrong. Freelance busting is wrong. Anti-independent contractor policies are wrong. stop attacking us. This is nuts. What you're doing is crazy.
Yeah, in California, there's not a single incumbent Democrat since 2020 who has yet to come out against AB5, even though it's been a complete and total disaster. And part of the reason why the collateral damage, the big picture collateral damage, was obscured after it went into effect was because around March or April, COVID hit and we had all these shutdowns. So it was great for Lorena Gonzalez because all of a sudden the musicians who weren't getting exempted and the theaters that were closing because of AB5, she could blame it on the, on the pandemic, and then when AB5 first was passed, in the first iteration of AB5, there were 65 professions that were exempt, that received blanket exemptions to bypass the ABC test. Then you had the election coming up in later 2020. So when they came up with the cleanup, when she came up with the cleanup bill, mopping up all the mess, she doled out a handful of exemptions to the loudest groups and the people that had the most connection in the Capitol. And then it was passed as an emergency measure to, as soon as Newsom signed it in September, it would go into effect, because normally a bill that gets signed in September doesn't go into effect until January. So it gave, some of these people relief, 3 months before they would have normally received it.
And I'll say
it's all about optics and smoke and mirrors. And
as you and I spoke before, Karen, that it fractured the group. Also, you took away the biggest parts of the group, exempted them, and you didn't leave the fight was getting big.
Right. And again, I just repeat this over and over again. They're not blanket exemptions. People think, all musicians are exempt. No, they're not. And even the ones that got exemptions, they still have restrictions on their work imposed upon them. In fact, like a band can't play at the same venue more than once a week. That's a restriction imposed upon you by a law.
Right.
A journalist also. They removed the onerous 35 cap on submissions that Lorena Gonzalez imposed, which was why you saw all those Vox writers get, laid off right in the beginning, and all the writers fighting it. But she lifted the cap because I think she knew it was unconstitutional. But in the same breath, she added a new caveat to the writer's exemption that said you cannot hire an independent contractor doing the same work at the same volume as an employee. So it's it causes employment law attorneys to just advise their clients, stay away from independent contractors with a 10-foot pole, even if they have a pathway to an exemption, because there's so many landmines in AB5. It's filled with landmines and poison pills and devious little things that they insert in there that, can put you out of business if you make a mistake.
It's a divide and conquer strategy is what they're doing.
Do you guys believe in this comment right here? Either of you? Problem is, if you flip a Democrat,
I honestly don't care if the people in office are Democrats or Republicans, as long as they understand it's wrong to outlaw people's careers, people's chosen career. This shouldn't be a political partisan issue. It's just ridiculous.
Like I find it very hard to believe no Democrats supported this. I mean, I know it's true. I'm not saying that.
There were a handful of Republicans who voted for the PRO Act. One of them was here in my home state of New Jersey, a U.S.
Right, but I mean, nobody will back this House Resolution 72.
So far, not yet. And I see a comment in the chat where someone's trying to look it up, and I guess Google's still pulling up the last Congress. That's last session. We're in 2023 now. So, Steve, I emailed you the link to the current one if you want to insert that in the chat, and then people will be able to find it.
Okay.
But yeah, no. So, I mean, you can see there's a tab on the Congress.gov website, and you can look at the list of who's co-sponsoring it. There's nothing but Republicans here.
Well, okay, Republicans need to be educated about it too. A lot of them don't understand AB5. They think I've heard people who are allies of ours say, well, it's not really a problem anymore because there's so many exemptions. That's just not true.
There's not going to be any exemptions at the federal level. There are not currently any exemptions written into anything at the federal level.
Okay. So I just pulled it up. Here is the link, you guys, to what Kim sent. So this This is House Bill 72 or
House Resolution
72. So here is the link, you guys. Because I don't want people feeling like it's a wasted effort to go talk to a Democrat leader with this.
No, in New Jersey, the way our state is controlled by Democrats. They have trifecta control. So we had to get the ear of moderate Democrats. And a lot of moderate Democrats will listen, especially if they've ever owned a business or if they know somebody who earns a living as an independent contractor. You can get through to them. They are very hesitant to come out publicly on our side because they're afraid of getting slapped by the political donors. But behind the scenes, we couldn't have stopped it without their help. We simply couldn't have.
Aren't a lot of those political donors independent contractors?
I have no idea.
I mean, if 1/3 of the American workforce, and now even from what I've read, maybe potentially more than 60 million.
Well, didn't they send out didn't the EPA send out an independent contractor to East Palestine in Ohio?
Yeah, there was a story in, I don't remember, it was NBC News or ABC News. It was one of those, it was a legitimate news story from a legitimate channel that said, yeah, the EPA had hired and was working with an independent contractor to straighten out the big train derailment nightmare going on in Ohio. That was lovely.
So the Ohio, Minneapolis, Illinois, I guess, I don't know, Kim, what others, you were mentioning some states beforehand. What's going on? Like what will like kind of enlighten some people to how bad this is getting and why they should care?
The thing that we have found that really clarifies in people's minds what's happening is if you simply meet with one of the people who has sponsored this bill. Whether it's a state level bill, a federal level bill, if they're pushing this policy, ask for a meeting. You're a taxpayer. They work for you. Ask for a meeting, tell them you want to talk about it, and then try to speak reasonably using the tone that we're using on this show. You don't have to go in yelling and screaming. Don't have like a crazy person. Just say, this is how I pay my mortgage. This is how I pay my rent. And I'm worried this is going to hurt me. What we have experienced in these meetings is a general attitude of we don't care. And when you come out of one of those meetings, the level of rage you have and the level of understanding you have about the fact that you personally are in the crosshairs, there's nothing more significant than coming out of one of those meetings. It could not be clearer that this is intentional harm. This is not collateral damage that they don't see coming. This isn't inadvertent mistakes being made. They just don't care. They're doing what they're doing to favor who they want to favor, and you will be brought down. Tough luck. And when you have those conversations and you come out of those meetings, it doesn't even have to be a meeting. It could be a phone call with an aide, whatever it is that you can get. You're going to realize very quickly that you need to start raising your voice if you want to save your own hide.
Yes, and in the words of Vina Dubal, the infamous tweet that got me blocked by her, my response was, all of the, what she calls the short-term pain across all of these industries that are losing, that are being harmed by AB5 will be worth the recentering of worker power. So they see us as expendable.
And to anybody that maybe hasn't heard it, I did an interview with Vina Dubal, and if you want to hear her vision, I think she was pretty candid there, and actually maybe even didn't want to say some of the things that were said, because I had a couple people, I think you two were among them, catching her in some lies there. But if you want to hear her vision, I would recommend go listen to that or watch that on YouTube here, because that is, it's not a vision I want. I don't think any of you that I know in here want that. And you'll be very eye-open to hear what this far other side thinks and what they want.
She's a professor at Hastings, and she specializes in talking about exploited workers and the fissured workplace. She's the go-to person that these labor writers interview. And she was touting AB5 before, during, and after, but she doesn't have a grasp about the details of the law itself. And I was shocked when I watched her interview with you, Steve, because she really didn't know what she was talking about some of the aspects of the bill. She actually said that Gail, who owns the opera company, could turn her opera into a co-op or something and pass the ABC test. It's completely absurd. She said that doctors were exempt because they have a higher incomes than anybody else, which is not true at all. She didn't even know she didn't know what EDD stood for.
I need to tell you too, in that interview, when I said that and she was referencing that co-op, she actually used an example of one in San Diego that's a nonprofit. And she was saying why, we've talked with them, they could do it. I actually talked with Gail after the fact. There's only one nonprofit opera house in San Diego. Gail knows the lady very well. That never happened.
Yes, she does. She only focuses on taxi companies and rideshare, and compares rideshare to sharecroppers. I mean, these are the kinds of tropes that she perpetrates, and it's very demeaning and dismissive to those of us who are independent professionals whose careers have been impacted. They don't acknowledge, they dismiss our AB5 stories. It's not speculation in California what can happen when these laws get passed. We are the canary in the coal mine here. We know across the board. There's a person in my group who was a licensed pharmacist who used to work as an independent contractor as a career because she would inspect compounding pharmacies up and down the state. Licensed pharmacists don't have an exemption from AB5, even though licensed psychologists do. Why is that? Why do licensed healthcare professionals with a doctorate degree, not allowed to make a living the way that they see fit to apply their expertise as a consultant?
Or in-house home care.
If you look at the cross section of professions that filed public comments opposing the actions the U.S. Labor Department's trying to take right now, there is no way anyone could exempt all these professions because people don't even realize that they exist. It was everybody from interior decorator type companies that go in and help real estate companies with whatever they're doing in buildings, to demolitions experts who are brought into certain types of construction jobs, to highly specialized veterinarians who work with big herds of cattle and they go from cattle farm to cattle farm. The cross section of professions that filed these public comments, it's staggering if you go through and look at it. And the idea that the attitude of, well, why can't you just change the way you make a living so we can have the world the way we want it? I find that attitude to be repulsive. These are people who have built businesses, sometimes like me, over decades. We chose this. We chose to be independent. We're succeeding at it. Get off our lawns.
You pay your taxes.
Yeah. Leave us
We
alone.
mention this every time we do a live stream. You guys, we pay our taxes.
I pay through the nose in taxes. And so this whole attitude of, well, you don't matter and you can be made to suffer because we think the world could be better in our mystical vision of a magical place that has never existed in reality before. I just find it atrociously offensive.
Well, I recommend people, if they want to see the various cross sections of professions and be shocked by some of the stories, horrible stories, just click on my AB5 personal stories roll there. I
put it in the comments, you guys. It's up there. I will be putting them in the show notes too. I put
forensic nurses,
Kim's link, and fly fishermen. You and I talked about fly fishermen. Like, what are you going to W-2 a fly fisherman instructor?
Yacht captains, lactation consultants, genealogists, massage therapists, wellness profession, the wedding planning industry, event meetings and events, community theaters that is very well documented.
Nonprofits should be a slap across the face to any one of you that's questioning this.
Nonprofits, political campaigns. If you're a little grassroots political candidate, grassroots, you have to make your campaign workers employees, where you can't have them be independent contractors anymore. So it stifles. And that's by design, obviously. There's just so many different respiratory therapists, nurse midwives, forensic nurses. The AB5, and we got a story from a forensic nurse who said AB5 actually is detrimental to rape victims, because they don't, especially in rural communities, because these hospitals in rural communities can't afford to keep a forensic nurse on staff to do these evidentiary forensic examinations with sensitivity that they're trained to do, so the wait times would be longer, and the if some staff person tried to do it, it would just, they don't know what they're doing. Rehab specialists, all sorts of healthcare professionals, consultants of all kinds, radio engineers, sign language interpreters. When AB5 first went into effect, there was lack of access to sign language interpreters, which is ADA mandated, because sign language interpreters are independent contractors. And of course, one of the big group that was involved, in the beginning, was interpreters and translators, musicians, community theater, performing artists. These are all people, a lot of them were liberal, progressive types of people that were protesting to Lorena Gonzalez's face.
Yeah.
And she was calling all of them Trump supporters and radical MAGA people, when she knew full well that we weren't.
Yeah.
That, when we protested one of her appearances, the people that were in the audience were Hispanic interpreters and performing artists from Hollywood.
Yeah.
And she started shouting us down. It was unbelievable. So they have their narrative. They try to characterize our freelancer movement, but it's just across the board. It affects all demographics, all political affiliations, and all types of professions, whether they're gig app-based professions or six-figure earners.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
And it is the testimony I gave at one of the U.S. Labor Department public hearings last summer was, why are you pro-choice about what happens in my uterus, but not about how I make a living?
Right.
Let's have that conversation. This shouldn't be a partisan thing. It just shouldn't. It unfortunately is. And to that end, I wanted to mention two things, because I know we're getting ready to wrap up. Again, House Resolution 72, call your congressperson and ask them to co-sponsor it. I also wanted to alert people, we have it from a little birdie that it's not been announced publicly yet, but there's probably going to be a hearing about the PRO Act in the United States Senate in the month of March. People shouldn't panic about that. That bill is not going to go anywhere as long as the Republicans control the House. It may get through the Senate, which it didn't last time, but it's not going to get through the House no matter what right now. But the fact that there's a big public hearing coming up, that's an opportunity to write letters to you're going to see this in the press. You're going to see it on Twitter. You're going to see things start to appear in media because this hearing is held. So write letters to the editor. It's a good chance to call your senator, your two senators from your state, and say, hey, I disagree with what's going on here. If you want to go to the United States Senate website for it's called the HELP Committee. The L in the HELP is for labor. If you want to go there, see who the members are, send them an email and say, hey, I think what you're doing is wrong. This is a really good chance to raise your voice and do those two things, both support House Resolution 72 and let folks know that you disagree with the United States Senate continuing to push the PRO Act.
So on that, after Biden's State of the Union, where he readdressed the PRO Act that I don't think anybody thought he'd bring up. I even think his handlers were probably like, no, what are you doing? Maybe not, but it's just been through so much of a beating. I just don't know. But then on the 9th of February, Kevin Kiley made a speech. And I know you wanted to touch on that a little bit. And I think that's important. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, Kevin Kiley was an assembly person when during the AB5 debacle, and he was our biggest advocate in the trenches with us freelancers. And he ran for a congressional seat this last year, and now he's in the U.S. House of Representatives, and he is leading a subcommittee on workforce or worker protections, I think is the name of it. So he's taking the lead, warning people about the cautionary tale AB5 in California and everything that's gone down. And so having him in Congress is going to be really helpful. Of course, he's being attacked because he's a Republican, but I guess that's just par for the course, but he gave his floor speech, and I encourage everybody to just look it up, go on YouTube and look it up, because he covers all the bases, everything that we're talking about here. And he's a very well-spoken and articulate about it, and he knows it backwards and forwards. He, like I said, I worked very closely with him through the years of trying to get AB5 repealed. And, I got him a letter signed by 8,000 freelancers that he distributed on the assembly floor for one motion hearing that, and he handed it to Lorena Gonzalez, and she tossed it across the desk and said, "Get this out of here." Yeah. And when I tweeted about what he told me that she said to him, she came at me. "What do you mean? Who told you that?" But she does. She's a very dismissive. They don't want to hear our AB5 stories. But Kevin Kiley is a real fighter, and he's gonna be somebody. Actually, in that press release about his floor speech, there's a quote in there from me about how lucky we are to have him, tackling the national pursuits that are coming out of California, that were inspired by California's debacles.
So Kim, before we do wrap this up, what did we not touch on that we need to?
The only other thing I would reiterate, other than we want support for House Resolution 72, and we want to make some noise about the PRO Act when this Senate hearing happens next month. The only other thing I would say is, if you live in a state that has trifecta Democrat control, just pay attention to your local media. Like I said, we're seeing noise in Minnesota, Illinois, New York State, and Pennsylvania most recently, although I don't think they had an election. I think they're now split. So I think they're probably okay there. But there's a bunch of states that have trifecta control. Washington State has it. Oregon has it. Colorado has it. Maine has it. You can Google it to see if your state is one of them. Those are the most likely states where AB5 copycat bills would pop up again, because that federal path is blocked with Republicans controlling the U.S. House of Representatives. They have to go another way if they want to try to get this through. The blue states with Democrat control of everything are the most likely playgrounds for them to launch into.
Yeah, right. And just remember also, try to put your partisan politics aside for 1 minute and stop with the knee-jerk reaction against the Republicans that are helping us. The only people that have helped us all along, with the exception of a few, like Kim mentioned, who voted against the PRO Act, are Republicans. And they just, if like that ISA resolution, I mean, it's just, you just get tomatoes thrown at you. If you even come out in support of Kevin Kiley and what he's doing, and it's just, you've got to put your politics, your political preferences aside and open your mind and see what is happening.
Yeah, that's kind of what I want to make sure that people understand too, is that, I always probably say it, I need to find a new way to say this, but I say things like, I'm not trying to be political, but there's some just no way to get around talking about some of this. And the bottom line is that I like to think of myself as there's a balance that even I can appreciate on both sides.
Well, for example, the rule that they're overturning and the 6-factor rule that they're trying to adopt, that we were talking about, the USDOL, they're overturning they're trying to overturn the Trump era rule that was placed there by Scalia's, what was his name?
Eugene Scalia was the labor secretary, son of the Supreme Court justice.
The minute they see the word Trump, that it's a Trump era rule, everybody, they lose their mind. And it's like, you want the Trump era rule. You want it to remain in place. You don't want this new rule that they're going to impose that's going to that's going to jeopardize or severely limit almost 60 million independent contractors and freelance arrangements in the country.
So I would say, I would add to that. See, somebody would clip that clip and say that Karen Anderson just said she supported Trump. Again, you don't have to support Trump to be for a rule that was or it's things that happened during his administration.
Well, I'm non-party preference,
yes.
And so I certainly support the Trump era rule. And
I'm just saying nobody should be gauging your politics based on something that you think about this or that or this or that.
Well, I just think there's too much, just knee-jerk reaction, and you have to really look at everything in detail, what they're trying to do to us, and frankly, it is coming from Democrats, and there's no way around that.
It took a lot of courage for the Democratic senators, Mark Warner, Mark Kelly, and Kyrsten Sinema to stand up against this. And I give them a lot of credit. We have cheered them online and, tried to make clear. Again, I can't say it enough. This should not be a partisan issue. Wiping out people's chosen careers should not be a partisan issue, period. Let's work on getting there where those of us who've been fighting it, like Karen in California, us in New Jersey, and now nationwide, we've been trying. We need to be louder than the money some of these policymakers are getting from the unions. That's what it has to boil down to. There are more of us than there are of them. People have to pick up the phone and start calling their lawmakers and getting in their faces about it.
They really do. It's more powerful coming from Democrat voters, because, but frankly, in California, there, like I keep saying, not a single incumbent Democrat has ever come out against AB5. How could that possibly be? It's been a complete disaster. It's unbelievable. The only people that helped us along the way were Republicans, and that elected Republicans, and that is a fact. They had all sorts of sets of amendments before AB5 was passed. Republicans came up with amendments to exempt nonprofits, like you were saying, or exempt pharmacists, or exempt musicians, and they all got tossed on the floor. And the supermajority in California is responsible for AB5, and it's just a fact. And I'm sorry if it rubs people the wrong way, but that's the way it is.
I mean, I was just trying to make sure that people, like, here's a comment from a friend of mine, Lisa, the driven mom. She says she's just going to straight out say it. She supports Trump because he was a businessman who wasn't bullied. And I was just trying to point out that you don't have to be a Trump supporter to be against this crap.
Correct. I've said this before publicly. I'm a registered independent. I think you just heard me say that I testified before the U.S. Labor Department. Why are you pro-choice about my uterus, but not about my career? You can probably figure out where I stand on that one. I want all the choices available to me. Right. When we speak with moderate, the key word is moderate Democrats behind closed doors, we've had some of them admit that AB5 is a disaster and they don't want any part of it spreading anywhere. The problem is we're some of the only people meeting with them. They need to see overwhelming resistance to what's going on, which means people have to try to understand this unfortunately kind of intricate issue and that it actually will affect them. Because when you first try to tell people about this, they say that just sounds crazy. Nobody would outlaw what I do for a living. That just sounds nuts. And then you have to get into AB5 and explain that it happened and this, that, and the other thing. And then, their eyes kind of glaze over. It's a lot to take in when you're talking about all this regulatory stuff. I like the language freelance busting. These people are freelance busting and we need to bust them before they bust us. That's what it boils down to for me.
And here's Tom at TNC Radio, who I do a show with. It's a trucking radio network. He's saying he's against Trump and AB5. So there,
right.
He's kind of my example. Like, and I'm not putting out my political view at all. I'm just saying, like, there's my example. That needs to be how people think. Like, don't let people get in your face and go, "Oh, you're for Trump." No. I'm talking about this issue.
Another problem with the narrative isn't just Trump or Republicans. It's that they conflate labor and the people that are advocating for these kinds of laws. We're conflating the quote unquote gig economy and Uber and Lyft with everything else. You know, they are not acknowledging all of the independent professionals and careers that are getting caught up in these onerous attacks on our worker freedom.
Yeah.
You know,
and that's what House Resolution 72 does. It just acknowledges that we have a huge number of tens of millions of independent workers of all kinds in this country, and we matter. That's all we want lawmakers to stand up and say. Go and ask your representative to say it. And if they won't say it, ask them why. See if they can defend it, because I can't for the life of me think of what the defense would be to not supporting that resolution.
You know, and Representative Katie Porter seems like she's going to be running for Dianne Feinstein's Senate seat. Well, there she was, you know, on a prom date with Lorena Gonzalez, who is despised across the board by so many in California, whether they're progressive, liberals, you know, independents, Republicans. She's just an equal opportunity destroyer, right? So for this person to align themselves with Katie,
I love your guys' terms.
I mean, with
you guys come up with, both you guys come up with some great ones. I love them.
You know, but they always throw out, well, they exploited workers. Yes, we know that there are industries that exploit workers, car washes, you know, all of these things. But AB5 is not the answer, and the ABC test is not the answer because it's too destructive for all the rest of us.
Yeah. So I'm putting their links in here, you guys. Karen runs a group, Freelancers Against AB5, on Facebook. I think it's close to 20,000 strong. A lot of writers, a lot of lawyers. And then I put in those blog rolls. You guys can go read stories of what, because if this comes down the pipe, every one of you should be reading some of these AB5 stories. You should read what it's done to people, because this is what will happen to us anywhere. It's not going to be different in other states.
It's a rude awakening that people just don't want to see the big picture collateral damage. They don't believe it exists. They just, it's unbelievable sometimes on Twitter when you see people, you know, just dismiss all of our ABC stories like it doesn't, like we don't matter. Our stories don't matter. They don't matter to these politicians either.
No.
It's like, why? And the USDOL too. It was obvious. Kim can tell you, we watched that dog and pony show. They didn't even record those public. They didn't even record our public comments. We had overwhelmingly freelancers coming in supporting the Trump rule and opposing the new rulemaking. Overwhelming from all walks of life and all professions, and they didn't even record it, and they kept people out of the comments too.
My favorite was when the Small Business Administration. United States Small Business Administration Office of Advocacy, they held a hearing last summer about this U.S. Labor Department proposal. The first two people who spoke were from the U.S. Labor Department, the people running the U.S. Labor Department, running the show, and they gave these speeches about how they were really looking forward to hearing from all of us and hearing our concerns and understanding our concerns, yada, yada, yada. Then the first two people called on to speak were Debbie Abrams Kaplan, who is a co-founder with me of Fight for Freelancers USA. And I was the second person called on to speak. And when I spoke, it was, I don't know, 5 minutes in to the public portion of the comments. And I said, I had questions for the U.S. Labor Department people to answer. And I said, please turn on your cameras and answer the questions. And the U.S. Small Business Administration woman said, oh, yeah, they left the meeting already. They're gone. So if they couldn't even give us 5 minutes of their time to listen to us at a meeting that was called specifically for them to listen to us.
They don't care what we have to say.
They don't care.
That's true in California too.
Right.
We just don't care. And when
so you have to show them that they have to care. You know, this is still a country run by the people for the people. Call your representatives. Tell them you want them co-sponsoring House Resolution 72. You want the hearings like the one coming up on the PRO Act in the Senate to stop. You want this craziness to be done with. Stop attacking our careers. Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. Stop attacking our careers.
And come to the recognition that there's bipartisan outrage about these kinds of policies that take away our opportunity to be our own boss and work for ourselves. That destroys so many businesses, hundreds of thousands of businesses in California, small businesses, and and independent contractors and entrepreneurs have been destroyed by this law.
Steve, can you play America the Beautiful now as we log off? How does that work? Do we need the rights?
I don't have the rights. Isn't that sad that I don't have the rights to that? Like, shouldn't that just be free for everybody to play? Like,
we listen, the message I hope people take away is, yeah, California's a problem, and people have been fighting tooth and nail. Karen's one of them, and trying to fix that problem. So far, everywhere else, we have stopped them. It is not impossible to stop them. We have won every battle we have fought so far after we all saw what this was. As Karen said, the canary in the coal mine was California. Then we all started fighting, and we have won every single time so far. Do not think that this is an unwinnable war. This is just a war with many fronts, and it's exhausting, and we need all the people in it we can get.
And to your viewers in other states or even California, we want Prop 22 to be upheld because it is a firewall. If it collapses, you're going to see if the floodgates and a lot more activity across the country against the gig economy, for sure.
Oh, I think the gig economy I think the gig economy would be just, first of all, real quick, 2025, it's supposed to triple worldwide. And I don't think that's a fake number. What are we going to do? Fall behind? I mean, the gig companies have said they'll close. Even they've looked at the franchise model. They've looked at what would happen under W-2. That's not a feasible thing for them. They can't, I know they don't make a profit now, but there's some, whatever, playing with the numbers. But it's, even if they played with the numbers a little more, there's no making that work. They cannot do that. Doesn't work.
That's why AB5 needs to be eliminated altogether and let,
Yes.
But we didn't even talk about the 70,000 independent owner-operator truckers independent owner-operator truckers in California that are now under the purview of AB5.
I think we touched on it a little bit. Yeah.
Is imposed now on the trucking industry.
Yep.
After, they had a preliminary injunction against the enforcement of it for so long, and the litigation reached a dead end this last September. And so that preliminary injunction was dissolved, and now all these truckers are faced with having to become, employee drivers. And so that's something they're still going to try to battle it in the courts. They're going back to the original judge and trying to get another injunction for, while they keep battling it. So, all of this is playing out in the courts, and like I said, the Uber and Lyft thing, Prop 22 and the Uber and Postmates lawsuit are both things that we're going to be hearing about in short order. And that's going to be very impactful, whatever those decisions are.
Well, guys, with that, I want to thank both of these ladies. So Lisa Rothstein is the third one that makes up their wolf pack. And kindly enough, they were nice enough to bring me into the wolf pack. This is a picture of the four of us together. We
that's in the middle.
Who's the one eating the yellow snow? That's got to be Steve.
That's probably me. I don't know.
I'm the one on the left there.
It's a black and white picture. You can't tell.
California side.
But yeah, you guys, I mean, like, this is around. This is happening. I know that some people are getting comfortable, but that's what I think. Am I wrong in saying that's what they want?
That's exactly what they want.
They want you to be comfortable.
They thrive in darkness. Force them into the light. Constantly be forcing them into the light.
They thrive on chaos and confusion, and they count on people not paying attention.
Nobody thought it would happen in California. Even after it happened, nobody believed it would truly happen, and it happened, and it's destroyed livelihoods. Right, but with that, I will put everybody's information, all of their links, and everything that I was putting throughout the stream I'll put it in the show notes below for everybody watching the replay. Please check out their stuff. Please check out their groups. Please check out Kim's websites. Watch what they're up to. And just like Kim said, I think that's some of the best advice today is to pay attention to your state. Maybe not even in just the trifecta states. Just pay attention. Because this is what happened in California. It happened, and everybody was like, wait, what? What do you mean I can't have my living anymore?
And it came this close to happening in New Jersey right after it. And but for us screaming and yelling our heads off in the press, it would have gotten through here too.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
So
dumpster fire in California really, I mean, even Senator Schumer said, well, we don't want to have what happened in California to happen in New York. I mean, even,
yeah.
even he came out and said it was a problem. So I don't know where they think that they're going to do a copycat AB5 bill in another state and not have the same issues.
With that said, thank you, ladies. I always love talking with you guys. And the wolf pack will continue to grow. If you guys want to be in the wolf pack, just get in the wolf pack. Do the things that it takes to be in the wolf pack. Contact people, make noise, post social media posts. See if people even that you know about all this. I don't know. Do anything you can, because the rule change is happening. I mean, like, these are real things happening, you guys. So I'm glad to hear that, because I thought the same thing. I'm glad to hear the PRO Act pretty much dead on arrival. But nonetheless, there's a reason why they're doing that. I don't know what it is exactly. Maybe it's to push a bunch of other things. And okay, we can't have the PRO Act. Well, let's just take these then instead and try and deal their way. I don't know, but I'm just saying they're not just doing it for no reason.
They're trying to appease their union buddies, trying to make them think that, oh, they are doing something or just keeping it alive. But that gives us the opportunity to raise all the issues of concern as in response.
Yeah. So be loud.
Also, I recommend pay attention to your local legislature. Here in California, it's the assembly and the state legislature. Pay attention who you're voting for. Don't just investigate where do they stand on your right to work as an independent contractor.
Yeah. Thank you both. Thank you, Kim. Thank you,
Thank
Karen.
you, Steve.
And always a pleasure. You guys are always welcome. And thank you, chat, for joining us today. And please post any questions in this if you're watching the replay in the notes, and I'll try and send them off to these two if they aren't already kind of keeping an eye on the video for a few days. So with that said, we will see you soon, and have a safe day, a good day, and be independent.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Steve.